There we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Cubist. My name is Bill Corey. I am the Cubist, and we have a fun show. First of all, it is our 40th episode, which is kind of a landmark, which is fun. But more importantly, we have really killer guests on. First and foremost, let's introduce said guests. We have the design team behind the upcoming Kickstarter Legend of Korra, Mr. Sen-Foong Lim and Jessey Wright. Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
Hey.
Great. How are you guys? Thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having us. I'm doing fine. I'm pretty sure I can speak for Jessey and say that he's also doing fine. Can I do that? Can I do that, Jess?
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
He's doing fine.
Everybody's fine. We also have a full boat of co-hosts, which is awesome. From my left, Miss Kimberly Rebia. Hello, Kimberly. How are you? Oh, she's beeping and moving.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
She's been having internet issues, so we'll come back to Kimberly in a little bit. We have Mr. Patrick Hillier on. Hello, Patrick.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And Mr. Brandon Kemp. Hello, Brandon.
Hello, all. How are you?
Great. I'm excited for tonight. The title of the episode is Property Management. We're going to be talking about dealing with intellectual properties in the space of game design. So how to treat them with respect, I guess, and also how to make sure that they translate correctly to the cardboard world. So I'm really geeked about this. I think this is going to be one of those fun conversations that maybe people kind of think about in the back of their head, but never actually like have the conversation with. So this will be cool. But first, our first segment, as it always is what have we played recently? So why don't we have our guests go first? Sen, do you mind if we start with you?
No, we can go right ahead with that.
Cool.
What we have played recently is Jessey and I and his wife and my son, my youngest, Monkey 2. We played Seventh Continent just yesterday, actually. Was it just yesterday or the night before? One of the two. Anyways, it was very recently. It was an interesting game. I'm interested in seeing more of it. I know Jessey's wife is never wanting to see it again. My son is actually, he keeps asking, when can we play that next? When can we play that next?
Did you say how old he was? Sorry.
He's 9.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I think that it's got something to it. I know that from a design perspective, I have some issues with the game itself. But from an overall experience, I think it might be okay with my kids playing and people who actually want to see the rest of the story, who are interested in the narrative tale of it. Mechanistically, it's not very complex. So for some people who don't, who want something that's mechanically interesting, you're not going to find it in Seventh Continent per se. But I've only gone through one hour of it, right? So who knows? There might be new stuff coming up that we don't even know yet. And that would be interesting. But,
we've been talking about Seventh Continent off and on for the last couple of weeks, actually, because I was also a backer and got my copy and have played it now. I think I probably logged something like 12, 13 hours of gameplay into it. And I'd be curious to know what you think. Like you said, that mechanistically, it's not maybe the deepest thing in the world. What was it specifically about the mechanics that turned you off? Or maybe not turned you off, but didn't wow you, or however you want to.
I mean, I like the idea of combining items and crafting items and things like that. But in the end, all of it is really run on the same thing. It's drawing cards from the deck of cards that is your life points, and seeing how many stars you get. For what we've played, that's all there is. And it's always like that. Now, there's things that you might want to create so that in the long run, you're drawing less cards. But in the end, that seems to be kind of it. The other issue that we had a little bit of problems with was that the turn structure is not structured at all.
Yeah.
And so that can become a problem when one person really wants to play, but the other people aren't letting them play. But as Jessey mentioned before, that is actually a strength of it as well, because it lets you get those really good story moments in. So it's a game that if you like story and you don't mind kind of doing the same thing over and over again, as far as I've seen anyways, then definitely it's like reading a Choose Your Own Adventure with your friends. That's cool. If you're the kind of player that needs something mechanically to do all the time and track and whatnot, that's not this game.
Right. That sounds fair to me. So on the Cubist scale, which is buy it, play it, forget it, or burn it, where would you put the Seventh Continent, son?
Play it.
Play
It's the kind of game you have to play to see if you want to play more of.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think I personally gave it a buy it because, but with the caveat that it is a storytelling experience for 1 or 2 players. I don't think I would want to play it with a table of 3 or 4. I think that as a solo experience, it's a no-brainer. As a 2-player experience, I think it's great. I don't know that I would want to play with 3 or 4 players. So there's
I'd agree with you there.
Yeah, there you go. Our other guest, Jessey, were you going to talk about something besides? Did he just steal all your thunder? Because you played
No, he didn't. I mean, I could have talked about Seventh Continent,
Sure.
but Sen took care of that. I actually I had the opportunity recently to also play Magic Maze, which is a Kinderspiel nominee this year. And so it's a little like cooperative real-time game where you're simultaneously controlling the same group of pieces, but each player has a different way they're allowed to manipulate the pieces. So I might be the only person that can move the pieces north, and you might be the only person that can move them east or west. And we're not allowed, and then so on top of this, we're not allowed to talk. And so we're just moving the pieces, trying to get them to places and get things to happen, and hoping that other players notice when the pieces are in a position where it's their job now to manipulate them and get them where they're going. And it's just we only played the intro scenario, but it was a lot of fun. And I can see why it was nominated for a pretty prestigious award.
Yeah, it seems like it would be a ton of fun. At first, when I heard about it, I was a little perplexed on how much fun a game where you're not allowed to talk at all would be. But I guess the tense silent, right? Like, to me, that's half the fun of these sorts of games. You know, a real-time game is, oh God, do this. But it works, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's a good. I'm actually kind of glad you brought that up, because that's actually the true for me as well. And yet, I'm like really endeared by Magic Maze. But my #1 criticism of Not Alone is that we sit around and play that game in silence. But in Magic Maze, it ends up being all right because everybody is so focused on the board and what's going on. And even though you're not allowed to talk, you're still communicating, or you're feeling the absence of communication in this really pointed way. Like, I know that you're not noticing what I want you to notice. And then the other thing the game gives you to sort of let you get one little bit of communication. There's this giant red pawn, and it's called the do something pawn. And the only way you're allowed to communicate is you can take the do something pawn and you can put it on the table in front of someone.
I assume that you put it at a different velocity depending on what's currently happening in the game. Like,
absolutely. And then the last thing that gives you a lot of tension in this game, which is what makes these sort of cooperative real-time games exciting, like Space Alert, which is one of my all-time favorite games, is that there's a 3-minute sand timer, and you lose if ever that sand timer runs out. And 3 minutes turns out to be long enough that you forget about it until it's almost gone.
Oh no!
So
time your sand timer.
Yeah, that's right.
Try time it. Mine is 3.5 one way, 2.5 the other way.
Oh no!
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah, and actually on that, you can get more time in the game. If ever you move a pawn onto this little sand timer symbol, you flip the sand timer. You immediately flip it, whether or not that actually buys you more time.
Oh, so if somebody's a doofus and steps on it when it's only gone like 30 seconds in, then you could screw yourselves out of like 2 minutes.
Right, but this also creates these interesting sort of push your luck things where I'll put a piece in a position where it can jump on the sand timer, and then I'm going to hope that you, the person who can actually move it onto that, leaves it alone until nearly the last second, and then moves it on and buys us as much time as possible. So even though you're not allowed to communicate, there's still a lot of this. There's still a lot of communication that goes on just in the way that or I guess communication you hope is going on. I don't know. It just works.
Awesome. I still haven't had a chance to try this one yet, but I'm really excited to. I'm a big fan of real-time games, so I'm intrigued by this one. On the Cubist scale, Jessey, is it a buy it, play it, forget it, or burn it?
I mean, I would say play it, then buy it. So because it's a real-time game, these are the kinds of games where you're either going to be a big fan of it or you're not going to be a fan at all. And so in that kind of situation, it's best if you can get a chance to give it a go, but then definitely pick it up after.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah, I really want to try it. Miss Kimberly, while your internet is here and you're actually like stable and it looks like you might be able to make noises. Well, you took a poll for what game you were going to talk about tonight on Twitter. What did they come up with?
The winner was Hannah Makoji by a decent chunk, good 10%, I believe.
Nice.
So, what? Sorry, the internet is terrible, so if this cuts out, my apologies. Also, if I go full Cylon. Hannah Makoji is a game designed by Kota Nakamaya and published by Cosmos in the US. And it's a 2-player game where you're trying to win the favor of 7 geishas. It's a little bit like Battle Line. And that way you're trying to win like the majority. You want to win 4 or you need to get 11 or more points. And it is played, there are 4 actions within a round. We'll go with that. And one of them is either you can lock down a card that you're going to play cards out to the geishas. You're going to have your hand of 6 to begin with. 6. And yeah, Bill's nodding at me.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And you're going to play a card down each time, but you have 4 action chips. One is hide a card from that will get played and your opponent doesn't get to see it. One is create 2 pairs. Your opponent gets to choose which pair they'd like. You get the other. And an action is remove 2 cards from the game. And your last one is put 3 out. Your opponent gets to choose 1. You keep 2. And they're all going to go to the favor of the geisha. And it's just literally like majority on each side of the geisha.
Okay.
There's 1 5-point, I believe 2-4, 2-3, 3-2. And it plays out rather quickly. And you just continue on. We played it 2 times yesterday, and we didn't finish any in the first round, but it only took 2 each time. I feel like maybe if you're more experienced players, it would go a little longer. It was kind of quick. It's got that similar tension and feel to Battle Line overall. It's a good game. The art's very pretty. It wasn't like mind-blowing for me.
Gotcha. So on the Cubist scale, buy it, play it, forget it, or burn it.
I'm just going to give it a play it.
Play it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've heard that it's very pretty, but that it feels a little bit too similar, like not in mechanics, but in just the feel of the game. This is a couple people that I've talked to have said that that's not necessarily a bad thing. If the game knows what it wants to be and it does it well, then good job. But I can see that. So play it, huh? Oh, we'll assume you said yes. There you go. There you go. Very good. No, that's awesome.
Yeah, it didn't give me any major new anything.
Gotcha.
It's a solid game. It's enjoyable. It's beautiful. I could see how plenty of people want to own it for $15. It's not one I personally need to own, so buy it.
Play it. Right. Got it.
I mean,
we know what you meant.
Oh.
So I don't need to own it. So
It's like 20 minutes of the internet crashing out. Sorry.
No worries. No worries. Mr. Patrick Hillier, possessor of a treasonous lower third on the Google Hangout.
I'm sorry. Hey, I was just thinking I should pick something from my fantasy football team.
Your fantasy board game league?
My board game league.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to that in a little bit. I'm foregoing my talking about a game to talk about the fantasy board game league. So,
all right. Well, anyway, and I don't have anything on my actual list that I played recently. I'm going to talk about something I mentioned on our podcast, but anyway, I'll talk about it again because I was so excited about it. It was the latest edition Trade and Intrigue expansion for Orleans. So I really like Orleans, and I have it's one of those games, I guess, what you call blinged out. I have everything. I got all the BGG extras. I got all the expansions, the deluxe set, the Meeples source insert and all that for it. So all Trade and Intrigue adds is a sort of little mini expansions. It adds a new, gosh, what they call it, the board.
A board?
It's the board where you discard call your guys to.
Oh, the city?
Yeah, it's kind of the city where you discard your guys. You put them on there, and then they go off into there. And it adds a new layer. It needs a new board, and that's really interesting. It culls your stuff. And it adds a new, there's those little tokens that are like a timer for the deck, timer for the game. It adds a new system for those, or there's a bigger deck, and they're more random, so you don't kind of know what's coming up. Like you've memorized the standard 9 that are in the game. Yeah. And then add some of these other cards that are okay, but just those 2 things alone. I mean, it's only like a $25 expansion or $20 expansion, but with that, it's called the Beneficial Deeds board. With that alone, it was so cool. We fought over spaces, and it got really kind of ruthless isn't the right word, but yeah, it was good.
Nice. Nice. Orleans got a lot of really good traction around here when it first came out, and then it sort of faded. We haven't played it for a while, so this might be a good way to refresh it. So for you, assuming people already like Orleans, is this buy it, play it, forget it, or burn it?
Definitely buy it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it really freshens up the game.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. Brandon already said he wasn't going to talk about a game because we're going to run a little bit long. So really quick, I want to talk about the Fantasy Board Game League. And normally I keep all the show business until the end of the show, but really fast, I want to get this in instead of talking about a game. The folks over at Draft Mechanic are doing their second season of a Fantasy Board Game League, which is basically a league that tracks plays as logged on BGG, ratings increases and decreases, and popular voting. So it's basically those three metrics, and two other people on this show, one of whom is being a traitorous jerkface by trying to get people to vote for his team in his lower third. I don't know.
Who's that?
At least Brandon's not being that terrible. Anyway, the Cubist is fielding a team this year in the Draft Mechanic thing. So I want to urge everybody to go to draftmechanic.net/FBGL for Fantasy Board Game League, and you can vote each week. And the biggest reason that I'm going to encourage you to do this is, number one, the folks at Draft Mechanic they do a great show, just really good content, sound quality is awesome, they're great people. Number two, from a selfish standpoint for you, dear listener/viewer, you can win yourself a $100 gift certificate to the online game store of your choice. One person, every time you vote through the roster for the week, or through the rosters for the week, you get one entry, and it'll go 11 weeks. So if you vote every week, you could get 11 chances to win $100 to your online game store of your choice. So go hit them up at draftmechanic.net/FBGL and vote there, and check out Draft Mechanic. They're great folks. So, all right, let's get on to our main topic, which we are calling property management. So this is something that I find really fascinating, because we've talked about this on the show before, where intellectual properties, it used to be the running gag, right? That if a game was themed around a TV show or a movie, it was automatically garbage. I mean, or maybe not garbage, but at least not great. You know, we can count on one hand the number of games that came out in, more than 10 years ago that weren't actively mocked. But the world has turned, so to speak, and Jessey and Sen have a Kickstarter coming in 2 days. Yeah, on Wednesday, right? Is when it launches?
Yeah, I guess so. Wednesday or Thursday, one of those 2 days.
I think it's the 13th, if I recall.
Right. I think you're right. I keep thinking Thursday, but you're right.
All right. So, the game that is launching is The Legend of Korra, which is the sequel to Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Kind of, yeah. So it's the next avatar in the series of avatars. If you understand avatars, they kind of embody in each new generation, and she is the new avatar, Korra.
So we were talking previous in the Cubist Slack earlier in our host chat channel, and I confessed straight up that I have no knowledge whatsoever of the Avatar universe. So I'm just going to profess my good-natured ignorance straight up front. And every time you guys talk universe lingo, I'm just going to be like, that sounds great. So
okay.
But if so this is the next of the avatars. Okay. What's the basic kind of pitch behind how the game works? I don't want to tell which one of you to talk, because I don't know how you guys want to approach this, because it's both of your babies. Jessey unmuted himself. Go, Jessey, go.
Okay, sure. So Avatar, The Legend of Korra Pro Bending Arena is a board game about a sport that happens in the anime. So in the universe of Avatar, let's not assume that everybody knows what we're talking about, but in the universe of Avatar, one of the cool hooks of this universe is that many people in the world have the ability to manipulate a specific element. So you have firebenders who are able to manipulate fire, and waterbenders water, earthbenders earth. There are also airbenders, but they're very rare. You might know the first series title was Avatar: The Last Airbender, and Korra takes place after that. So and then you also have the Avatar, who is special because they can manipulate all four elements. So there you go, caught up all on the
gotcha.
So what pro bending is it's a sport that gets developed in the show and occurs in in Legend of Korra, where 3 benders match off against 3 benders, an earth, a fire, and a water bender, with the aim of trying to use their elemental powers to knock the opposing team off the back of the arena. And so what we did in the board game is we made a 2-player head-to-head arena combat game that does exactly that. You line up your 3 benders against your opponent. You play cards to throw elemental tokens on the board to either attack your opponent or defend yourself. You try and overwhelm them and knock them off the back of the arena before they can do the same to you.
So sumo wrestling.
No.
I know I'm being a smart aleck.
That's okay.
No, this sounds awesome. So it is a 2-player only game?
Yes. Yeah, it really is a 2-player only game. So there are going to be announcements over the course of the campaign that will kind of let you play in different ways, but really it is a 2-player game at its heart.
Okay.
In core.
I'm sorry, I don't want to ruin.
It's okay.
I'm being a ruiner. Darn it.
Nope.
That's awesome. All right. Well, this sounds so. One of the questions, actually, Matt in the chat room, we have the live chat, of course, going for the live stream here. Matt in the chat asked, I asked for our viewers to ask questions of our guests every show. And he started off with one, which I think is awesome. It was already one of the questions I was going to ask anyway, which is when you're working with an IP, like Legend of Korra as an example, or really any IP, do you first match the IP to mechanics you already have a base for, or do you try to come up with the mechanics after you get the IP? So like, like chicken or egg here, which way does it usually go?
Well, I mean, typically what usually happens for us anyways is because of, I'm just going to say it, that because we have decent games, we get asked to make games a lot. And when we get asked to make games for publishers who have licenses, then we're in the nice situation where we can say, oh, let's make a game from ground up to suit that game, which is why you're going to get to see a lot more games that have IPs that are also good games, as opposed to, hey, let's skin this thing and slap together in the 4 weeks that we have left on our licensing agreement with Warner Brothers and throw it out there to the world, which is what we used to see in the past. And so now I think a lot of licensors, so companies, publishers that get the licenses, are getting, or I guess those are licensees, they are having extended contracts to allow for that development of a really good game that is not only matching the IP somewhat, but integrated with the IP well. So if I had a preference, that's the way we would go, where we would come up with the mechanics after we get the IP. However, sometimes we're already thinking of mechanisms and we get a hold of an IP. So one that we just got, I can't really say that we got it because we don't really have it yet, but it's okay. So it's in the genre of stealth action games, and we have the 98% chance of getting it. And Jesse and I had already come up with a mechanism for a stealth-y type game set in a different world, where it was this whole mechanism based on fear that we were really happy with, and we thought, this is cool. We actually never made it. We just talked about it a lot. But then when somebody said, oh, we want to get you to do a game for this particular thing, we're like, yes, let's do that thing. And so sometimes it happens the other way as well. Gotcha. But again, it has to be a really good fit. Otherwise, I won't feel good with putting my name on it. One of the things that happens nowadays, as people know, is that designers are almost a brand. And so my brand is kind of important to me because it's how I pay some of my bills. And so, no, honestly, we've been approached by companies and say, hey, can you make this game for this blockbuster movie that's coming out this summer? And I say, hey, great, let's do that thing. I like the design. I like the, the movie. I like the director, whatever, the actor in it. Let's do this. What can you tell me about the game? And they say, we can't tell you anything because we're also under NDA. And I say, okay, then I cannot make that game for you because I'm not putting my name on a game that has no link to the IP.
Right.
I've read all the comics on that. I've seen the past movies on it. I, know about it. But if it's not directly linked to that particular movie and you name it, the movie game, it's going to reflect poorly on me as a designer. So I can't do that. I just won't do that.
Right. And
I have standards.
That's awesome. And well, you should. And here's the thing, Sen. I mean, you have. I'm going to frankly admit that I'm Googling a little bit while I'm during the show because I'm such a quote unquote pro. But you have 4 different IP-based games that have all been very well received, right? Like you have Rock, Paper, Wizard, you've got The Godfather: A New Dawn, you have Orphan Black, and now you have Legend of Korra, which is already getting positive buzz. I mean, partially because of the IP itself,
Sure.
but the concept of the game is obviously appealing to people. There's already, there's people waiting for day one so that way they can back it. This is a wheelhouse that you have. So your insistence on making sure that you're only putting your name on good stuff makes perfect sense, right? Because you've now built up this track record over the last couple of years, especially. Nobody would blame you for not wanting to possibly tarnish that by having something that you didn't have any control over. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think you're doing yourself a disservice as a designer if you're going to do that. I mean, it is really, really, really attractive. Let me say that. It is because everybody wants to work with an IP. It's just a really attractive thing. So usually we get much less in terms of royalty rates percentage-wise, but the print run and the sale through is usually much higher because the IP tends to sell itself.
Yeah.
So there is a really big attraction to doing IP work, but it's difficult. It's actually really hard. There's a lot of ups and downs with IP work that we should talk about, right, Jessey?
Right. I mean, sorry.
Lob it over there, Sen. Good job.
Thanks, Sen.
No, I completely understand. That makes perfect sense. Another question from the chat room: have you ever designed a game based on an IP, trying to get permission, and then having to change the IP if it wasn't accepted? It's like if you designed a game thinking, boy, I have a Metal Gear Solid board game that's just stuck in my head, and maybe we can get Metal Gear Solid. I can't imagine that would be a thing that you, with how busy you are, Sen. I don't know, anybody that keeps up with Sen on social media knows that he always has like 47 projects going at once, or at least it seems like it.
Isn't junk art just Metal Gear Solid when it got rejected?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you put the box for junk art over your head, it's exactly like Metal Gear Solid.
Yeah, that's how it came together. I swear I was in the room when he and Jay came up with that.
Yeah. This is how it came together. Yeah, and then the little exclamation mark goes. Yeah, it's great.
Yes.
Okay, so let's backpedal a little bit here. So you were talking about wanting to know the IP, where you mentioned earlier that the IP, and so therefore designing for that IP is something that's that's really a big deal for you. What goes into, like, what is the thought process behind from the time you have an IP until the game design process starts? And Jessey, I'm going to start with you because I feel like I've been aiming the other way just because I've talked to Sen more is what it is. So, so how does that thought process start for you?
Are we talking about circumstances where we've already got the IP, or?
Sure.
Okay. I mean, as soon as we find out that we might possibly have an IP, like such as this one that we can't talk about in a great deal of detail, but that we're like 98% sure that we're going to get, the moment that a publisher, or some cases just sends me a message, an email, or a Facebook blast that says, hey, what do you think about this IP? I have game ideas that are going. The brainstorming process starts, and we get to working on the game. And for me, that's partly because my own design process is usually inspired by the media I'm consuming around me. And so I'm confident that if Sen and I put a little bit of work into, say, coming up with a core mechanic for a pro-bending arena board game, if the IP falls through, we're still going to have a good core mechanic for a two-player dueling arena game. We might have to shift the way we were theming it, but at that point in the design process, the theme is largely inspiration and isn't yet tightly integrated into the mechanics. So the moment the IP is sort of potentially on the table, I've got game mechanics coming together.
Okay. So it's just a matter of basically brainstorming and using the IP as sort of an inspiration jumping off point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I just have to mention something very, very, very meta
Please.
just happened. Chad Roberts was saying in the feed, in the chat,
In the live chat.
yeah, that, this sounds like scenarios where people will, skin Flux and Munchkin. And then Andrew Hackard from Steve Jackson Games just friended me on Facebook. So that was really weird. Really, really weird.
We have, I am apparently slowly but surely developing the reputation of being a curmudgeon a little bit. And as such, I've ranted every once in a great while about Munchkin on the show. But, as much as we pick, they're happy cashing their checks. So I can't really hate on them too much, right? That division is still doing just fine.
No, and it's sort of the idea that, as gamers, and okay, let's admit it, some of us are a little bit elitist when it comes to the games that we like to play, that we kind of forget that there are other people who need to be introduced to the hobby, and Munchkin's a perfectly great way to do that. Munchkin also gives people that like that experience, hands down guaranteed they are going to get that experience through there. So I think people definitely enter the hobby through Munchkin. There are people who that's all they play, and that's great. There are people who use that as the perfect filler between, D&D, or while they're waiting for somebody to get to the table. I think they should play Rock, Paper, Wizards, but that's just me. So I am not necessarily a Munchkin hater. I just don't like playing it myself, and that's okay too.
Right. See, that you are the good version of what I think I'm going to be, and then just end up ranting about some. That's all right.
Because you have a beard.
Is that what it is? What?
Well, yeah, I think beards just make people curmudgeon-y all by themselves.
You're beardist. I cannot believe that you're making beardist comments like that.
I do all the time.
Beards prevent the evil from seeping out your face.
Exactly. It's like world insulation.
I don't know. Ask Dylan and Daryl about my beardist nature.
Boo.
They will tell you.
Boo.
I'm envious. Maybe that's what it is.
I was going to say that's my issue. So
well, I'm envious of your setups where you can mix. This is for those of you that maybe don't follow both Sen and I on social media. Both of us are DJs, although that is sort of like saying that a Yugo and a Rolls Royce are both cars, in that they sort of use the same general mechanics but do totally different things. Sen is a mixed like scratch turntable DJ, and I'm a karaoke guy. So we're sort of tangentially related. Is that a good way?
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
We're like brothers from another mother.
Yeah, except for one of us can grow facial hair. Sorry.
Ooh, that's
anyway.
totally true.
Very good. So, Patrick mentioned something in the chat, and Patrick, you're right here, and I want you to ask this out loud so that way the audio people can hear it, and also because you haven't talked in a long time.
That's okay. So my fear of designing an IP game would be the fans picking it apart. It's kind of which I'm one of. So a Trek game comes out, and I'm all over it because I love Trek, but I'm also an expert at Trek, right? So I think I read it somewhere. Davio said something once about, you got to really know the game to be able to
Rob says a lot of stuff.
Yeah, well, I know, but I thought that was a good wisdom from his point, right? Why bother something you don't know? So
Oh, for sure. And then the other point is Kevin Wilson's counterpoint to that would be, don't let the IP be a roadblock or a stop sign. Let it be a guidepost.
Neat.
So a lot of times when you get into IP work, if you're a fan, like I'm a huge fan of most of the IPs we work with, and I delve really deeply into all the IPs that I like, because I like them for a reason.
Yeah.
And so I'm the kind of person who's like, oh, no, that must be in there, and it must do this thing. And it's like my head canon is so strong for things that I have a real hard time stepping away from it and saying, oh, well, it doesn't actually make any game sense to do that. So that is one reason why I do co-design, is because sometimes I will go down a rabbit hole and I will never come up. And it takes people like Jessey and Jay to actually say, hey, fanboy, let's not do that, because you're an otaku who just really likes that particular anime, and nobody knows it like you do. And that's the thing.
Right.
So nobody knows, or very few people understand the IP of, say, Star Trek or whatever at the same level that maybe you do, Patrick. And there may be some people who are around your level, there may be some people who are greater, but the vast majority of people who like Trek are kind of casual fans of Star Trek.
Yeah.
They may go to a con every now and then, but they don't speak Klingon. And so you're really actually catering to those people more than the hardcore fans. Yes, you want to have some quote-unquote fan service in there for the hardcore fans, and yes, you want the representation of your IP to be correct in your board game, but just recognizing, like what Kevin said, is don't let it stop you from making a good game just because you think something should be in there that really doesn't need to be in there. Are we losing hosts like left, right, and center?
We are.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Holy cow.
Brandon's internet went down, and Kimberly's been having internet.
Yeah, that happened to Brandon yesterday. It is true. Also I think as a designer of anything in general, it's hard to kind of step away from your design and see it from somebody else's perspective. I'm an architect by trade, and I work for people who've never designed a building before, and sometimes I forget that they don't know what I know. So I forget that sometimes. So seeing it from all sides is important.
I feel like your comment before, Sen, about how the co-designers keep you from falling all the way down the rabbit hole reminds me a lot of Phil Eklund. So I've talked about High Frontier on this show a lot because I backed the 3rd edition of it, got it, and fell hopelessly in love with it. But I recognize that by modern game design sensibilities, even though it is the most accessible of Phil Eklund's games,
that's not saying a lot.
Yeah, that's not saying a lot, right? It's still brain burn. I still, to this point, I've owned the game now for 6 months. I am still not confident with the full rule set. Like, I have yet to play a complete game with the entire rule set as printed.
I don't blame you. I think my brain is still recovering from the last time I played BIOS Megafauna, which was, I don't know, 7 years ago or something. It's no, I mean, he makes incredibly detailed games, and that's, if you like that kind of stuff, he's your man. Play his games; they're awesome. If you don't like that stuff, maybe go play something else that might have the same theme, but may not have that same level of detail that he puts into his games. Like, his games are really more like simulations than they are like more of the games that people think of as games, right? So
I think I enjoy High Frontier for what it is, but I definitely would not want games like High Frontier to be the majority of my collection or gaming experiences, right? Like, it's one of those things where I also would not want to eat fried insects on the daily. You know what I mean? But every once in a while, I think that's fun, right? To try something, a more exotic food. That's a weird analogy. I just tried to pull there, but whatever. I just listened to a podcast about it. That's all I'm going to say. So, it's one of those things where I think that there is a place in collections for those detail-oriented games, but I agree with you. Falling too far down the rabbit hole just takes your game out of the realm of accessibility. Jesse, I'm going to kick one to you. We've got a bunch of people asking questions in the chat, which is awesome. And one of the questions that I saw here is, what about IP that you're kind of meh on? Like, is that something that you would work with? How big does the check have to be before you're willing to be like, well, fine.
Right. So, oddly, if the check is big enough, I'll do it. But the checks don't get that big in board game design. They don't get to the point where the check will be the thing that convinces me to do it.
Also, you have to understand that Jesse is really still a starving student for the next couple of weeks. So
for the next couple of weeks, then I'll be a starving postdoc. No, but as for IPs that I'm not super enthusiastic about, it would have to be an IP that I really actually dislike for me not to even consider working on it, not giving it a fair shake. In part because it's actually related to the rabbit hole thing. I actually would be more worried about working on IPs I'm deeply passionate about than when. Oh, Sen, you're joining the club.
I feel like Tyler.
You look like Tyler.
I know, right? This is awesome.
All right.
I feel much more like I don't know, testosterone.
I know.
He's gonna start getting
And
snug
I
in
also
there.
feel like I'm gonna start like
should-
ranting and being a curmudgeon about something.
Hey, quiet down,
Oh
you.
wait! Now
Hang
I
on.
feel
Do
great.
I have the ability to mute people in this thing? Is that how that works? Sen, it's been
Yes.
great having you on the show. Jesse. So basically, it would make you more nervous for it to be something you were passionate about.
Yeah, something that I was like Sen was describing, where like my headcanon is so this is an IP that I've lived and breathed through a significant portion of my life. Now someone's asking me to make a game about it. I would think carefully about whether or not I would do that, because I'd be worried that the result wouldn't end up being a good game. It would end up being like a far too detailed simulation of the IP that captures all the things that my passion tells me are super important about it, and doesn't actually result in an experience that anybody other than me and the 4 other people in the world that care that much about the thing will appreciate. And if you can get co-designers on a project that don't have that passion, then you can turn your passion into a resource. But you have to have the sort of willpower to defer to your co-designers and recognize that sometimes your passion for a thing can be a barrier to making another thing about that thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's a whole lot of things, Jess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you sound. We are fans of the thing speak on the show, so you're all good in our book. No, but I get what you mean, right? Like it's similar to what Sen was saying before, is that you can fall too far down the rabbit hole, and if you don't have somebody else to pull you out of there, then it's just I definitely get that. Somebody said something about hardest IP to work with. Like, is there a type of IP, like movies or books or anime or something like that you think would be more or less difficult? It seems to me that it's primarily movies and TV that this happens to, right? Like I can't think of book only IPs. Well, I guess Discworld.
There's books, and which also has TV, but it was a book first. There's books and comic books. So any of the transmedia type products would do well as an IP. Things that are hard are things that only have like one instance of it, like
Small
one
stuff.
episode or one comic book that is like 3 issues. That's hard to work with because there's not a lot of playing field unless you know the creator. And so when the creators own their IPs, that makes life a lot easier for us because they work alongside us better. Sure. So Oni Publishing right now has a new branch called Oni Games, which is trying to link up their comic book artists and writers with game designers in order to produce, at least design good games and then ship them out or shop them to publishers that would fit that particular brand. So like their newest one was the Scott Pilgrim game, right? The Renegade.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of thing, but all of Oni games aren't necessarily going to Renegade. All the Oni other licenses may go other places. They want to find the best fit for the product, as well as the designer and all that kind of stuff. So it's there's a lot of people doing some interesting work in IP land as well.
Absolutely. And as I sort of hinted at the beginning of the show, I think it's fascinating that there has been such a resurgence in good IP game design. Mm-hmm. I think the first one that I feel like everybody sort of points to here is, with Spartacus, right? Spartacus seems like the land, or Battlestar Galactica. I'm sorry, BSG.
Yeah,
BSG would be
one of the more storied ones from around this time that was like, hey, that's a good game. Now, I mean, there's probably been some other ones that are German-based IPs that we just don't know because we don't know that IP,
right?
Or French or whatever. But for things that we know, I think BSG was kind of that high point where it felt like BSG, it looked like BSG, it played like BSG, and it was officially licensed.
Yeah.
And
it turned out to be a good game because I'm someone that has no attachment to BSG at all, and I've played a ton of BSG.
How are we still friends?
I missed it, man.
I had never played it when it first came out either, but I've seen
fracking toaster.
Yeah, I never watched the show until I had 2 games under my belt, and the game caused me to go watch the show.
And that's really cool because that's actually what a lot of people are hoping, right? So companies like IDW, where their mandate is really make licensed comics, they're also trying to say, okay, if you like our comics, maybe you'll like our games. And then on the cross side, it's like, well, maybe if you like our games, you'll also buy our comics, right? So that whole idea of using the licenses to drive sales in your other niche areas is quite a powerful tool that we can drive people in both directions.
When done well.
Yes, when done well. And that is critical.
Because I think that I personally, I think that there are going to be some styles of game that could unintentionally have the opposite effect. And what I mean by that is some games, I think marrying an IP to a design or to a mechanism set is that, and we've talked about it already, so I don't want to hammer on this too much, but I feel like that's such a critical moment in this process, right? Because if you get a game that ends up not feeling like the IP when all is said and done, it would potentially have the opposite effect and would just screw everything up from that sense. I'm losing my sentence here, but you know what I mean? Like, something where if the game has to really match the IP, or else you're doing everybody a disservice and getting the opposite of that. Well, this game is stupid, I'm definitely not going to watch the show or whatever.
Oh, totally. I think that's the big problem with them. From our perspective as well, like I said, if it's not going to be a good game, I don't want to make it either. So it works on all aspects of that.
You are killing me, Sen.
Oh, sorry. I don't
it occurs to me that I haven't explained this very visual joke because this show gets turned into an audio podcast the next day. Sen has made himself a construction paper fake beard and is holding it over his face while he talks to us in this very serious voice. And we're all supposed to, of course, take him extremely seriously.
Hold on. Hey, Jesse, can I get my philosophy degree now?
You need to stroke that for at least 4 years.
Whoa, time out. Whoa. All right, hold on.
All right, audio podcast.
Audio podcast, that won't translate too well.
Stroke the beard.
Well, so much for that clean tag we had on iTunes. There, that goes there right there. All right. Somebody asked, Ideal. What was the question? I'm sorry. I'm scrolling through the thing because we've got a really active chat room, which is
while you look, you were talking about IDW, so they got one coming out, Planet of the Apes, which has me both intrigued and scared. If you guys have seen that or not, I'm a big 70s Planet of the Apes fan, and from what I've read about it, it's kind of weird. It's like you're playing 4 personalities of Charlton Heston.
Yes, that is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know. I just don't even know what to think about this one. So I'll probably check it out. But it should be interesting.
And I think it's that kind of thing that you need to check out. It's on your scale, it'd be like, play it first.
Yeah, it's definitely.
It's a Richard Launius game. What else can I say, right?
Yeah. Gonna be some dice.
Yeah, gonna be some dice, and it's neat because not that game, but just in general, what you said. I'm a big fan of 70s things. I think we're coming to that age where people with that disposable income are our age, like about the 40s, late 30s, early 40s, and that's why we're seeing all of these IPs that are from our childhood, like from the 60s and 70s that got serialized, that we watched in the 70s, grew up with in the 80s. And so we're going to see more and more of that kind of thing. So the retro gaming, like the Centipede thing that you mentioned in the chat, all the Atari stuff, right? That is hitting those high notes of recognizable IPs for us as people who grew up in that time, right? So all those things are very important when you think about IPs. Who are we catering to? Who's the demographic that's buying? We should cater to them. So, I mean, you'll probably see there's a lot of people right now clamoring for, like, hey, can we get G.I. Joe or He-Man or all those things that we all grew up with and love? And Jesse, who is a good decade younger than us, is like, what? Who is this guy?
G.I. Man Joe?
Yeah, why does this guy have, like, a cat that's scared, and why does he have that bob haircut that's really, and how come nobody knows he's He-Man? He looks exactly the same, right? Except he's clothes.
And not to suck the fun out of the joke, but the other half of this is that some of these IPs only work if you can put your brain in that nostalgic frame of mind too, right? And when you go back and look at them with a fresh pair of eyes, like we'll talk about He-Man, man, He-Man's real bad if you didn't watch it when you were a kid. Like if you go back as somebody that never saw it and try and rewatch it, you know what I mean? Or not rewatch it, but I mean, if you go with a fresh pair of eyes, it's not good.
Oh yeah, I mean, all that stuff is so dated. It's very bad. It's very bad. Like on my watch list right now, I am watching Inhumanoids, and I'm watching Battle of the Planets. And I'm watching all those things because I loved them when I was a kid and I want to show them to my children. And it's like, no, you're never going to watch these. Let's just watch, Samurai Jack or something that was at least decent, because they age very poorly. The animation's not good. The storytelling's not good. And something about it hooked me when I was a kid. And you know what it was? It's now I remember, like, if you remember Battle of the Planets, I was always playing Battle of the Planets with my friends. We were always like I was Keop all the time. For some reason, I had to be Keop. I was the smallest person, right? So, but that's the memory that gets me back into, hey, let's watch this again. And then you do, and it's like, that's not like I remember it. And why is it not? Because I actually remember more about playing with my friends and making up our own stories. So,
sure.
There you go.
And the toys. I think a lot of those IPs had a lot to do with selling toys to kids and making, giving that merch, which really, if you think about it, sort of plays into the same mentality we're talking about as far as IPs to comics to games and movies to games and whatnot. It's the same sort of idea. It's just bigger people toys.
Yeah, and they kind of went in reverse. So a lot of them were toy lines before they became cartoons, and then some of them were vice versa, that they were cartoons before they became toy lines. But yeah, and
some of them should have been neither.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to hear what Jessey wants remade as a game from his childhood.
Yeah, so if you could take any one IP from your childhood and get the rights with a snap of your fingers and gamify it, what would it be?
They're all games already.
What?
Well, his childhood was like 3 weeks ago, so that's. I mean,
Hey, that's not fair.
Pokemon is a game, Jessey.
That is your children's childhood. In mine, but I guess that one stretches. But no, I wouldn't. Pokemon's not a great one, to be honest. So when you first said that, for me, and unfortunately it's already been done by a very talented designer, by actually a number of very talented designers. But Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a big part of my childhood growing up. But given that one's sort of already been done, I actually just threw one in the chat, which is something I actually would have a lot of fun with. I think would be Neverending Story.
Okay, yeah.
Which was a series of movies that I watched enough as a kid that I had them all memorized. And I cried every time.
Can we make a swamp where horses die?
Exactly. That would be an important part about capturing the IP, right? You got to capture the experience of, enjoying it for the first time, which means the board game would have to make you cry every time.
Yeah, you'd have to have it'd have to come with tissues and be waterproof.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Neverending Story had a big impact on me, like growing up as a kid, seeking adventure in games all the time, right? It was like that first adventure story I got hooked on. And so
that's great.
The one that I've always regretted that we haven't seen a really good adventure game of yet is Labyrinth.
I was just thinking of that.
That one's tough.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, but I feel like it feels like a game while you're watching the movie. You know what I mean? The Labyrinth half of that story feels like it's already there. But that's
it's a tough one because have you played the new one?
No, I have not.
Please don't.
Okay, I've heard that, which is why I haven't played it.
If you like this movie, save yourself the pain and suffering of playing that game. And the sad thing is that they're actually coming up with another movie. So they're another movie-based game. They're doing the Dark Crystal, which to me is actually more.
That's right.
So Dark Crystal's closer to my heart than Labyrinth is, and I'm really kind of disappointed because I mean we have access to those licenses as well. But we've never really moved on them, and now I'm disappointed in myself almost for not doing a better game for those, because they deserve really good games because they're really good IPs.
They are. Well, Jim Henson.
Farscape is the other one for me.
Ooh, Farscape would be fun.
Farscape.
There's a variable player powers-esque. Like that I would want to be some of those characters, right? Like that would not be a game where I would want to be viewing it from a macro. I would really want to be zoomed in and be like, it would be very cool. Very cool. All right. So when it comes to Legend of Korra, I want to get back to Legend of Korra because half the reason that I wanted to have you guys on the show is so that way we could talk about this. When it comes to this, this is going to be, there are some segments of gamerdom that don't really deal well with head-to-head direct conflict games.
Sure.
How do you sell this game to somebody that doesn't like direct conflict? And this is a challenge here, right? Because I know it's a direct conflict game. What is it about this game that's really going to hook somebody that isn't into in-your-face beat 'em up stuff?
From my perspective, it's the combinations that you can pull off. If you're not into directly mashing your opponent's face into the dirt, you can actually just pull off cool combos and feel good about that while you're mashing your opponent's face into the dirt. And the mashing of the opponent is just a secondary effect of the cool combo you did, right? Okay. So that game mastery is a really neat thing. Yeah. Each time you play, each set of cards that you play is like a little puzzle that you're figuring out, and that's pretty cool the way that we've worked that out.
Yeah, that's actually what I was going to point to, is that while it is a game about like head-to-head conflict, it doesn't have to feel like a conflict. You can because every turn, in a way, what happens is your opponent is going to put some tokens on the board, which is kind of like issuing a challenge to you. Can you deal with this with the cards you have in your hands? And then you're going to look at your hand on your turn, and you're going to try and deal with it at the same time as you put a challenge on the table for them. And then they're going to have the opportunity to do the same. So while it is a game about head-to-head conflict, because the way that we made the turn flow and the fact that every turn is a small little puzzle, there's a sense in which it doesn't feel combative, even though it is combative. Mm-hmm. That will make more sense if you play the game.
The puzzle within the card play is more of the driving force, or at least the way you're describing it, it sounds like that there is enough puzzle in the card play that it isn't all. I mean, the net effect is antagonistic.
So sometimes the destination is not the most important thing, right? Sometimes it's the trip that you take to get to the destination, and in this case, both are mechanically important, but you can get your enjoyment out of the game from one part, if not the other.
That's awesome. Well, I am looking forward to it. One last question I wanted to ask. Mm-hmm. If you are not an Avatar, Airbender, Korra fan, and this is sort of the other challenge, right? Is how does this game, how heavily does this lean on the lore of the IP as far as the game, in your opinion? Like for somebody that isn't a fan, are they going to be lost?
Oh, no, not at all.
No, absolutely not.
And also, I don't know how you couldn't be a fan, but anyway, that's just despite the fact. No, I think the game there's nothing in the game other than the trappings of the wording of the things, like you're a bender and you're throwing air, and this is your name and your team, and you're using chi to buy stuff. I mean, that's all thematic and fine, but you could abstract that out and still enjoy the game for the combat puzzle. That's a good way to describe it. The combat puzzle that it is. Exactly. That isn't to say that the theme is not deeply integrated, though, because it sounds like I just said that, and that's the furthest thing from the truth.
It sounds like it has an accessible theme, is what it comes down to. The theme isn't opaque.
No, and when you design a good game with an IP. And you design it well, I think you can take the IP off and it'll still be a good game, and you can put IP back on and it won't seem pasted on.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because it was made with this game was made based on the IP, not the other way around. So the two are inextricably, but they are extricable, right? So they're linked, but you can take them apart and still recognize that this is a good game without the trappings. Put the trappings on, and it just makes it that much better for people who like that world.
Right. And so to throw a bit of a design spin to what Sen just said, at least what I was trying to push our design process to do, and I think we achieved in the end, was we have the trappings of Legend of Korra, pro bending, covering the thematic aspects of the game, but the way that we actually hook the game to the IP is not by relying on those trappings, but by creating a mechanical system that gives players the feeling of being pro benders.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like you're throwing elements around. You feel like your team is coordinating and working together, or not, and that's why you're losing. And so we captured those emotions, the emotions that you are reading into the characters when you're watching the show. We put those into the players of the board game. And that's the way that we hooked to the IP. But it turns out that those kinds of feelings, that feeling of like intense back and forth, push and pull gameplay, are engaging in and of themselves, independently of the IP that they're being drawn from.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just, and to me, that just sounds like the mark of a smart design, which is, I would expect nothing less from you two. So I'm really excited for this one. This is going to be hitting Kickstarter in 2 days on Wednesday, September 13th, for those of you that may not be watching live. So I mean, I'm shameless about being a shill on the show. I have no problem with that. I'm going to back it day one, and I think you guys should too, because it sounds, Sen and Jessey know their stuff, and I think it's just sounds fascinating. And plus, I might even go watch the show.
You really should.
You should.
You really should.
So, all right, fine, I'll do it. All right.
You will thank us.
All right. Do I need to start with Avatar, or should I start with Korra?
No, you can start with Korra.
You can start with Korra.
I believe Avatar. I like Avatar better personally.
I like Korra better.
So
there was something of a spirited debate pre-show across the co-hosts on the same issue. So
yeah, but you should definitely at least check it out for a couple episodes and see what you like about it, and maybe there's some things you don't, and that's cool too. Basically, our game focuses on the first season, or the first book, as it's called.
The first 6 episodes of the first season, actually.
Yeah, really. But then more of the rest. There's a bit more.
There's a bit more. Yeah, I know.
So if I watch the first 6 episodes of the first book of Legend of Korra, I will have all of the knowledge I will need to understand 90% of the game.
Yes.
Yes.
Not that I should stop.
And by saying 90%, I mean 90% of the base game.
Oh, dun dun dun. Gotcha. All right. And we will say no more from there. All right. So we will put a link to the Kickstarter page when it goes live. I will come back and revisit the show notes.
Thank you so much.
On YouTube when it goes live. But in the meanwhile,
you're so much better than me.
Oh no, I'm not.
Let's go to the notes, and we never do.
Yeah. No. I think this will be the 3rd episode out of 40 that I will have remembered to do anything with the show notes. So do not give me too many accolades here. I'm just as bad. I learned it from you, Sen. I learned it from Meeple Syrup.
I learned it from you, Dad. There's the throwback for you.
Yeah.
Despite his lack of facial hair, Sen's older than me. Sorry. Anyway, all right. So if we have not quite finished our shilling, if people want to know more about you guys, both personally or the game, where would we send them online?
Oh, to the Kickstarter page for sure.
But we can't do that right now, Sen.
I know. So I'm at Sen-Foong Lim on Twitter. You can follow me on Facebook, and I love engaging with people about game design and whatnot. So please, any questions you have, feel free to fire them off. I'm really, just that easy to get a hold of.
And for the record, Sen on Facebook is the starter of profound conversations. There's like a guaranteed 1 thread per day minimum that ends up just being this gigantic rabbit hole of deep thought that you can get into. So if you want to lose productivity, definitely follow Sen on Facebook. It will swallow your life.
That's where I get my beard stroking done.
Yeah. Why do you think my beard is so perfect, sir?
There you go. It's very nice.
There you go. Jessey, how about you?
I'm at TT Void on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook. Just as easy to get a hold of as Sen. And I have a website that's in disrepair at the moment, but throughthevoid.com is where I'm starting to try and put up my game design work. And so if you want to look at that, you can.
And you should.
You should. Yes, that's right. In fact, the more people that look at it, the more embarrassed I'll feel, so the more likely I'll actually get around to making it look nice.
I may or may not have clicked through the website on your Twitter bio today and said, oh, well, so that's a thing. And then just, yeah.
See, now I'm feeling embarrassed. And
Exactly.
I feel like maybe
See,
I should
you wanted to be embarrassed so that way you would be motivated. I just put you on blast on a YouTube show. So there you go. That's the best I know how to do, man. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for you, Jesse.
It's out of love. It's out of love for the
out of nothing but love. Mr. Patrick Hillier, thank you so much for co-hosting with us. Where can people find out about you?
I'm the last of the co-hosts. I am Patrick Hillier. I'm found best on Twitter at @OverTheHillier. And I am over at What Did You Play This Week podcast, also as a contributor and interviewer on our conversation thing, which goes out on Wednesdays every once in a while. This week is a special Punchboard Media episode with some interviews I did during Gen Con. What happens at Punchboard Media, Bill?
You know what? That was a terrible segue. You should be ashamed of that. The Cubist is, of course, a proud member of Punchboard Media, where we all bring something to the table. Go to punchboardmedia.com for all kinds of awesome board game-related content. Really good stuff over there. Written, audio, video, all kinds of fun stuff. Speaking of places you can go on the internet, do us a favor, hit up thecubistpodcast.com. You can choose to support us through the Patreon page if you so desire. There's lots of fun merch there, including our hashtag banana pants wear. There's also snazzy new iPhone cases. If you would like an iPhone case with the Cubist logo on it, you can do that. There's all kinds of fun stuff.
Can I get a banana pants fake beard?
Sen? Get on it.
I will handcraft you one.
Awesome.
Send me the dimensions of your face.
Okay.
Please don't do that.
Never been asked that before.
For those that are listening to this, Sen's hastily crafted beard is kind of a masterpiece.
It's pretty good. It's the wrong color.
I mean, I'm a bearded individual myself, and I'm thinking about ordering a replacement.
Mm-hmm.
Sen's beard makes him
as
look
a man
like
who can't grow a beard, I'm in need of a handcrafted fake beard.
Terrible. And one last plug, because I'm gonna be that guy. Draftmechanic.net/FBGL. Vote for the Cube Pushers. We have the best team in the league. Just saying. Now get out of here, Patrick. You're wrong. Sen and Jesse, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. I hope you guys. It was a blast picking your brains on this. I know this is a topic that a lot of people are really looking forward to. So,
great. Yeah, it was great being here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching and or listening. We really appreciate it. We will catch up with you all again next week. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you later. Be good.